Everyone, I'm Joel Despain. I'm the Public Information Officer for the Madison Police Department, for those of you who do not know me. Again, we're in the throes of some difficult times in our city, and as a police department, as a community, we're kind of come to grips with what took place last night. I have here to speak with you, and someone I know who will continue to speak with you in these days ahead, our Chief Mike Koval. For those of you who are not from Wisconsin, if there are some here, there are some elements to what he is able to speak to and not speak to because of a new state law that was passed here in Wisconsin. So those moments where shots were fired, I don't believe the chief can talk specifically to those moments, as that's going to be part of the Department of Criminal Investigation's job to investigate those moments. But otherwise, the chief is here to speak with you, and Chief Mike Koval.
Thank you, Joel. I have just a few talking points today that I'd like to share with you. First of which is we had a 19-year-old African-American man slain last night. And to his family, and to his friends, and to this community, that is a loss. That is a tragic loss for which all of us who have families with, particularly myself, I have 2 adult sons myself. I couldn't even begin to try to get my hands around the enormity of the loss and the tragic consequences of what their family and friends are grappling with. And in this sense, I would like to extend from me and the Madison Police Department, of course, our most sincerest condolences for the loss of that life. Last night, in the wee hours of the morning, I did, with the help of others, non-police officers, go out to his mom's house in an attempt to express those personal sentiments to her without the fanfare of people sort of authenticating that moment. I was greeted in the driveway by his grandmother, Tony's grandmother, and his grandfather. And we spoke outside for about 45 minutes, in which again I expressed our remorse for the loss of life. And at the end of which we did pray together, which I was honored to be a part of. And I then asked if I could go in and speak directly to Tony's mom. And they thought that based on the dynamics of what was occurring, that it would not be an appropriate time. And I respect that, I understand that, I get that. And so from that standpoint, then I left their home. But I mean to make this a very public show of our remorse and contrition for his loss. 19 years old is too young. I guess the second thing that I want to talk about as we move forward in the days and months to come is the fact that folks are angry, resent, mistrustful, disappointed, shocked, chagrined, and any one of a number of other adjectives you care to use in terms of the circumstances surrounding this tragic death. And I get that. Be that as it may, I implore those leaders in our community, those who are titled, and those who lead by action, our de facto leaders, if you will, to follow the direction as was evidenced by Tony's family in suggesting that that dissent, that displeasure, that hurt be channeled in a way that is non-destructive to others, that respects others and their property, and that falls within the boundaries of tolerance for one another as we all move through a grieving process and a coping process. I thought that in light of the events from last night, it took tremendous moral fortitude and courage for the mother and the grandmother of Tony Robinson to lead us all by action back at the scene where this incident took place in attempting to get that message out to those who would care to listen. And we remain committed as officers of the court for those who do want to take to the street and protest whatever their compunction may be with how this case has been handled. We are officers of the court, there to defend, to facilitate, to foster those First Amendment rights of assembly and freedom of speech. We would only ask that, again, taking a measure of strength from Tony Robinson's family, can we do so with a sense of responsibility and restraint? I urge the same as their family. Finally, as I know, people must be wondering about process issues. Once it was clear that this was a Madison police officer-involved shooting incident, as Joel mentioned, we are mandated then at that time to basically freeze that scene in order to keep the integrity of that scene intact for an outside, third-party, independent investigatory review. That was scrupulously honored. We want to extend our thanks to the Wisconsin Department of Justice, DCI, Division of Criminal Investigation, in spite of the fact that they are an agency with a statewide reach and issues of mustering resources. They did a remarkable job in getting boots on the ground and subsequently took over that scene. For those from a process standpoint who may not know, the report now is driven by DCI. This is their independent opportunity to review the case forensically with their own crime lab investigators, state-of-the-art things that are done in their labs that we don't offer. They are the ones who are the primary witness interviewers. They are the ones that will ultimately do all the diagrams that might result, and ultimately their findings of fact, untainted or untouched by the Madison Police Department. It is their findings of fact that will subsequently be submitted and reviewed by yet another independent bases, and that would be the District Attorney for Dane County. So frankly, when we have this from a process standpoint, I hope people understand that if they would be so gracious, to be so fair, as to allow the process as it's intended to be crafted to take its course, you will have not one, but two separate and independent entities reviewing the work that was or was not done. And at the end of the day, the Madison police, frankly, have almost no impetus in terms of what guides the investigation of DCI, and certainly no bearing on the independent review on charging decisions from the District Attorney for the County of Dane. As with any process-based system, those checks and balances that we've seen or adopted from the criminal justice system are certainly in full effect and apply to the affected employee of the Madison Police Department. That fundamental process of fairness and due process must be maintained, must be made untethered and unswayed by those who would suggest or opine outcomes that are not predicated on facts that aren't even known or reflected in a record at this point. So I would ask the community to wait patiently as these other practitioners examine their role in the grand scheme of this process. And then once those conclusions have been made, obviously, we will follow the dictate of the law. The officer involved, Matt Kenny. Matt is a 45-year-old officer, and he has 12 plus years of experience with the City of Madison Police Department. He was, in fact, the primary responder to the Williamson Street address in question. I know that using the due diligence of the Fourth Estate and what you guys do in journalism, that it's only a matter of time that you'd realize that Matt has been involved in an officer-involved shooting earlier in his career. I believe it was 2007 in a Camden Road incident where the circumstances of that case were basically concluded to be a suicide by cop sort of predilection. That case was obviously submitted to a review process, not the same process that we have today, but it would have been ultimately reviewed and audited by the district attorney's office at that time. And of course he was exonerated of any criminal culpability or liability in that instance, and subsequently went on to actually receive a commendation, a valor for his participation in that previous incident. Matt has, as I said, a little over 12 years of experience, coming on 13. And at that, I think I've talked about the three main things I wanted to talk about, and I can take some limited questions, understanding that we are constrained by the fact that DCI, this is their baby now.
How do you spell his name?
Kenny.
Chief, are you able to elaborate on what led up to the shooting or hearing that Mr. Robinson was jumping in and out of traffic? There was some sort of disruption?
Well, that information would have been commonly heard or understood from the 911 call that many of you who now have apps can monitor on your phones, on a smartphone. So I don't think that that is reflecting any new information that couldn't already have been in the public domain.
Can you talk about what he was doing at this home? Was it his house? Was he there with friends?
His relationship to the home is unclear to me, although there was certainly familiar acquaintances. This was not a random place he had hung out.
Was he alone?
That I can't be sure of, because of course we had heard that there was a disturbance taking place inside, which in and of itself would assume that there was more than one voice heard.
Chief, can you speak at all to Tony Robinson's criminal history, any past police interactions with him before this one?
You know, I could, but I choose not to. I'm not here to do a character workup on someone who's lost his life less than 24 hours ago. If through the course of the investigation, those are public records accessible to all, and of course it will at some point, I suppose, have some bearing in terms of what people will use. I frankly think it is, for our purposes today, wholly inappropriate, and I am not going to blemish anyone's character, particularly one as young as his, and over the circumstances of what his family has dealt with.
Have you spoken to Officer Kenny, and how's he doing?
We have a peer support network that is activated when an officer is involved in any sort of a critical incident, and he has been partnered with his peer support buddy, if you will, and of course his command staff and I and his friends are checking in periodically, but as you might expect, nobody gets into my line of work hoping that you will ever have to take the life of another. And it's irreparable, it's devastating, and your life is obviously changed inalterably forever. Certainly I am not comparing or contrasting what he's experienced with the experience of the Robinson household. That is, in fact, the direst of the most dire. But since you asked, I will comment the fact that it's difficult, very difficult.
would you be able to speak to the extent of injuries to Officer Kenny? I understand he was taken to the hospital. Is that precautionary? Was he admitted?
It was partly precautionary because he did get injured, but again, I don't want to go into the nuances of the investigation. It may be germane to their findings. But it's also as a measure of protocol that in the officer-involved shooting protocol that we have worked up is that there is also going to be a mandatory blood draw done at an ER for purposes of showing what the officer's sobriety, lack of drugs in the system, all of that stuff is obviously fundamentally important to seeing what would have been happening physiologically within his system at the time the incident occurred. That's a standard protocol.
Chief, are you concerned at all for Mr. Kenny's safety?
I'm actually concerned about 455 officers' safety right now. The chants, the emails, the vitriolic rhetoric that was clearly heard in and around the scene and around our community, I'm certain most officers have been trained to sort of develop a Teflon-esque quality so that that doesn't become an aggregated sort of part of who you are and how you're defined. But as we all have feet of clay, I certainly know that over protracted periods of time, when you hear threats, when you hear vile things, it resonates. It's difficult to just sort of compartmentalize that kind of feeling. But be that as it may, I'm confident that our officers understand that professional decorum would dictate that that cannot enter into the calculus of how we interact with the public. Now more than ever, we have to be committed to engaging and not running into some sort of sanctuary recluse because of the minions of a few.
Can you talk about the plans moving forward for the department with everything that's going on in the city, how you'll handle protests and things like that?
Well, I guess if there's an element of our repertoire that I'd like to think that I take a personal pride in, it would be the Madison method, in the sense that we take it as a badge of honor that we really desperately view our role as constitutional officer of the court in making these demonstrations workable. We will try to do preventive measures with those leaders, actual or otherwise, that we can say, how can we make this a win-win proposition? If you want an intersection, if you want to walk down the road, if you want to take them all, how can we make this a win for you, and balancing against the needs of our other constituents who also have rights to move about freely. So we will do, as we've always done, I hope, an exemplary job in exercising restraint. We like to refer to it as crowd management as opposed to crowd control, because the best crowds are those that have those leaders within the group that sort of act as their own marshals, as it were, in working with us to make this a winnable proposition.
Chief, is there any indication yet from last night about whether or not this team was armed? I know last night initial reports suggested
Let's,
the case.
you know, I'm glad you raised it. Thank you for early onset. Thank you. There's no doubt that the fact that we have to be clear about this. I want to be very transparent. He was unarmed. And that's going to make this all the more complicated for the investigators, for the public, to accept, to understand, and to wait patiently for what other circumstances, if any, were there that were attendant to this scene such that deadly force had to be used.
Can you talk at all about the disturbance that they responded to? What was going on inside that apartment that sent them there to begin with?
Well, in terms of, I think that gets back to the earlier frame of reference here, in terms of what the specific things that were going on that would give rise to the necessity to getting into that door. Those are sort of still the thing that's pending under the purview of DCI. But the condition precedent that you alleged to, Miss, earlier would have been, obviously, we did not self-initiate this call on our own. There were several calls to dispatch that suggested that there were some concerns about the young man and his behavior outside. So that was the sort of the kickstart, if you will, that got the officers rolling on the call.
So this is the person in traffic that they are called for. That's how this all starts, or?
I don't know that that's how it starts, but that's a part of the calculus.
Okay.
It's a part of the call.
And there was a reference to a battery that was tied into that as well. What was the sort of nexus there as far as the timeline?
Well, again, only because it's not something that's cryptic. The calls, as they're being relayed to the officer, continue to build from the baseline, or what the original onset of the call was. And then the dispatcher continues to provide layers of information if, in fact, more information comes in. And it's my understanding, then, that additional information continued to come into this call as it was evolving from where it started originally. And it was not the same caller freshening or updating the call. But beyond that, I can't get too much into the details because, of course, I expect that DCI will be following up on the originators of those individual calls.
And this might be a DCI question, but
Yeah.
how do we get from the street to the apartment? Was there a pursuit? Did the officer pursue?
That I don't know, so I won't comment. I'll let DCI figure out that nexus.
Chief, what is Officer Kenny's status going forward now in the last few weeks?
Yes, as is appropriate for our protocol, unless and until we hear back from, first through the DCI report, will make its way to the DA's office. The DA's office will then have to vet it and decide what their findings of fact are. So in that interim period of time, he will not be in direct contact with anybody from the public. In fact, he will be on administrative leave with pay pending the outcome of this decision.
Is he still in Madison at this time?
I couldn't say, but I would imagine he is, because as obviously as is the needs of DCI, we want to make our people available when they're ready to take more questioning.
What steps have you taken, if any, to meet with community members, to avoid some of the problems that have happened in other cities with incidents like this? Or are you actively reaching out to community groups to try to discuss all this?
Well, it's a part of the ongoing dialogue, to be sure. Like I said, last night it was fairly dynamic well into the evening, so not a whole lot of time to galvanize at that point. But I have then, as I said, I made a trek out to the family. I thought their needs should come first. And then, in fact, I hope to be going to some other meetings that are currently taking place even later this afternoon and into next week. We definitely don't want to be MIA. We do not want to be missing in action now. Of the most critical times is when the police has to stand up and take those questions and take that concern to heart. Because if nothing else, people need to tell me squarely how upset they are with the Madison Police Department, as many have. And clearly, whenever there's an officer-involved shooting, that connotes then issues of where the community's trust barometer is. So right now, in all candor, I am certain but that our trust variable is in a volatile place, and we're going to have to work through that together to get some measure of healing and reconciliation.
Chief, you might want to mention your ongoing dialogue you had with people in the community as well.
Thank you. I only took office, first bad mistake, in April of last year, and as a pledge to transparency and to be engaged with community, every quarter I go to all the districts and have opening listening sessions. So I just literally last week completed my last listening session on the south side, and I expect that because they've been fairly robust, we will continue those efforts.
You also might want to speak to our internal investigation that would take place after.
Oh yeah. One of the things that some people sort of lose track of because of the, as it's appropriate, the criminal culpability angle that looks at these officer-involved shootings, is that there is also then sort of a parallel investigation that is done internally by professional standards, which is some people's moniker for internal affairs, and they also have to review it as a standalone matter to see if in fact policy and procedure violations were violated in sort of a corollary or companion vein. So that also takes place simultaneously.
Speaking of that, this is a question that always comes up.
Yeah.
Why was a gun used in this case, not a taser, not those pellet things?
Yeah, pellet, you know, non-lethal shotguns.
What are they called? The
Non-lethal?
Rubber bullets?
Right. Well, again, the dynamics of every call give you so much time to decide which tool, if you will, is the most appropriate based on those subject officer factors and the dynamics therein. So, as I'm sure the question you raised will in fact be within the purview of DCI, because everyone in the state of Wisconsin that's a certified police officer has to understand the rules of force in their engagement. And obviously the objective is always to use that minimal amount of non-deadly force required to create the control mechanism for stabilizing that call. If in fact though those subject officer factors are very compelling and there's a sense of urgency, you are not going to be underwhelming in terms of your survival skills if you take something that would not establish your safety or the safety of others. And again, I don't mean to make this a big use of force thing. I think that's where we have to see those unique facts, as DCI will do, to see how that falls into that continuum of options that are out there for all of us that have to be governed. Whether it was excessive or not will be a corollary, obviously, of their investigation, which is why I really can't comment.
I mean, would you be able to say if there was any other type of, any other tool, any other piece of force used in this incident?
Again, when you say force, force can be as much as me escorting you by the elbow out to the car, as the case may be. So use of handcuffs is considered use of force in our matrix. So force is sort of an amorphous context that sort of has a lengthy range in its continuum. So those go to the details, and the details are still being fleshed out by DCI.
Chief, are you shocked at the rapidness of the protests and the, I guess, the tone of the protests, not knowing all the facts of the case yet?
Yes and no. I frankly think if we look at the national narrative on police and citizen encounters, that when you have two factors, you have a, quote, a perverse perfect storm for seeing the coverage of which I usually don't see half y'all. Milwaukee, the country of Milwaukee's here, good to see you. What I don't see is when you see the national narrative, and I think that's now us, when you take the fact that that individual who is killed is a person of color, and the facts reveal that that individual who was slain was unarmed, that should collectively create a catalyst for people to be concerned about policing methodologies that were used. And I get that. I really understand that. And I know that's why we're here today and having discussed that. But I think that in the after...
More questions, you guys, and let the chief go over the rest. So.
Okay.
Chief, a lot of people are comparing this to Ferguson. Do you think that's a fair comparison?
Well, to the extent that you have, again, a person of color, unarmed, who subsequently loses his life at the hands of the police, I can't very well distance myself from that brutal reality. What I can suggest, however, is that while I can not castigate other shops, I can be proud of the shop that I own. And the fact of the matter remains is that if you look at the caliber and the character and the content of the people I hire and the training methodologies we engage in, I'm very proud of this workforce. Our average age is 29. The average recruit has a bachelor's degree in any one of a number of degree disciplines. Criminal justice is not the majority or the compelling one. A lot of these folks, this is their third or fourth or fifth job in terms of careers. Many of them speak a second language and have tremendous life, volunteer, work experiences, language capabilities. I mean, the state requires 520 hours. We're closer to 900 hours of basic training. I hear national forums for unconscious bias training. We've been doing that for a half a dozen years, both at in-service and continuing service. We have people come in from the law school that talk to us about Project Innocence and explain the implications of wrongful convictions and how police are a part of that. We're constantly talking about the ethics of racial disparities and all of that as is appropriate when you're the gatekeeper to the criminal justice system. So I'd like to believe, and I'm confident in saying, that this community gets a very highly qualified individual put into the streets. Our individuals do not go as solo practitioners until 9 months from the date that they took the oath of office, because they have 5 months of the academy, followed by 4 months of one-on-one mentoring from a field training coach in the field before we emancipate them. So I don't think that training is an afterthought. I think training is part and parcel, a part of who we are. It's in our DNA.
Do you feel that your recent dialogue with the Ungifted and Black, it would complicate dealing with the protesters or dealing with this group?
Well, we all know here in Madison that the Young Gifted and Black and I have had some scrimmages, mostly over the idea or the notion of their allegation that they would prefer to have no police whatsoever in some of our challenged neighborhoods. Obviously, I'm not going to abdicate that responsibility, and to that extent we've agreed to disagree. But actually on some matters of substance, as is evidenced by some of the legislative initiatives that I've suggested, I do think that there's common ground in some of the issues that Young Gifted and Black has raised, as have I. So I don't disdain or dispute the fact that there could be a meaningful dialogue in the future, but right now the rhetoric's rolling pretty hot and heavy. There's an awful lot of disdain towards the police department, and at some point, at some time, I would be amenable to a facilitated discussion with them, but not one that would be inclined to sort of the rhetorical missives that sometimes get thrown at me from members of that group when I've been out in civil forums.
How are you kind of working with your department? Obviously a challenging time for every officer. How are you kind of working with them to get them through this now?
I have to remind them of who we are, and that for the most part, we have a public that embraces what we're trying to do, understands the complexities and the challenges of the job, and support our efforts. Be that as it may, this is no time to take stock in trade and become filled with ourselves with some measure of hubris because we've done a good job in the past. You're only as good in community trust based on what's happening now, what's in front of you. So this is the time when we have to have as much constructive engagement, if not more so, in light of the strains that this has placed in our community.
Thanks, Chief.
Thank you.
I will, talk with the chief, and definitely will try to make, the chief or someone available as time pushes on. We're not a police department where we're going to fold our tents and you're not going to find us. So I apologize to some. I wasn't in communication as best as I could have been because I was coaching a basketball tournament, and I'm glad I got to do that. But now I'm back, and I've got some people who are helping me out, so we'll try to get to everybody's phone calls, and if you have additional questions, please reach out to me. And again, I believe Chief Koval will make himself available in the coming days, and so if you need anything specifically from us, please let me know. Thank you very much. I think this will be it for today. Again, we'll kind of measure it as the days go on. Again, as the chief was saying, we're going to have to wait for DCI to do their job. And so I think the chief has told you what he can, and I'm not sure that we can provide a lot more detail on the incident itself, and really leave that up to DCI.
Electronic photo if needed.
Oh yeah. Oh, and for those of you who are looking for a picture of Officer Kinney, I know the local media, and I think Milwaukee, I probably have your email. I will email out that photo, but certainly if people are not on my email list, just let me know and I'll get that photo to you as well. So, but we can get you his photo. And again, thank you. And if we need to do something tomorrow, I'll let you know. You guys give me a sense as to where you're at as well.